This is Beyond the Big Screen podcast with your host, Steve Guerra. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Big Screen podcast, where we talk about great movies and stories so great they should be movies. Find show notes, links to subscribe, and leave Apple Podcast reviews by going to our website, beyondthebigscreen.com. And now, let's go beyond the big screen.
Hey, welcome back to Beyond the Big Screen, where we're going to be tackling one of mine and Steve's favorite movies, Total Recall, and with our regular contributor, Frank. If you're a loyal listener of the show, you're probably wondering to yourself, hey, hasn't Steve and Chris already done Total Recall? You would be correct in thinking that. But at the time, I was pretty green doing the whole podcast thing. So we decided, I've gotten better at it, and we decided, hey, we have this new contributor, Frank, coming on the show all the time. Like, why don't we just do it again and, pull out some more themes out of it? What's your opinion on this movie, Frank?
Oh, I love it. That's why I'm sitting here. I like Philip K. Dick's stories, and I think there's been a lot of good adaptations of his stories, and this was the first one I ever saw. And I still remember I was in the Army when it came out, and I was in Germany, so I didn't, have anything but the theater on the base, and they were always like the equivalent of your deep discount movie theaters, the $2 theaters. So they were like, 6 months behind. And this had come out, and I drove down to Garmisch, which is a resort town in southern Bavaria, where they actually had some movie theaters that showed American films without dubbing, without subtitles. And we went down there, a couple of buddies and I, we watched like 3 movies in one day, and this was one of them. And I remember walking out of this one just gobsmacked because of the spectacle that it was, and also because of the mystery, was it all a dream, starting to break it down and argue about it with my friends and stuff. And, it's a fun movie. It's cheesy and campy at times, but it's also, uber violent at times and kind of bloody and definitely rated R. And so it's kind of there's some dissonance there, and it's classic Arnold. So what's not to love?
Yeah, I'd have to say, for me personally, I probably watch this film multiple times a year, just because I love it so much. I grew up watching it. I think on the first podcast, I grew up watching it all the time. It was always always seemed to be on TBS for whatever odd reason. They were always playing Total Recall, and I was like a kid. I would just watch it, and I love it for all the things that you pointed out. Like it blends so many different kind of genres. It's like you got your sci-fi, but it's like an R-rated movie. Arnold, I've always been a huge fan of Arnold. I do amateur bodybuilding to a degree. I lift weights. And so Arnold is one of the guys that got me into wanting to lift weights, because I looked up to Arnold because of movies like Total Recall and Conan and a bunch of others.
For me, I remember the first time I watched it, and it just blew my mind. And I think every time I watch it, and I've watched it probably once a year at least since it came out, and it's like a fine scotch or a fine wine, as maybe as cheesy as that sounds, but it just opens up with something new every time you watch it. And for a 90s Arnold sci-fi movie to have that much staying power after 35 years almost, that's just amazing.
A lot of these movies that are coming out nowadays, you can even see it with these new Star Wars movies that came out. I think it was like Rogue One and Han Solo, like the continuation of the story. I don't think anyone's really going to remember those. They might remember them because they're like Star Wars, but I don't think people are going to have the memories of like, oh yeah, I used to stay up late at night and watch Total Recall on TBS. Like I just don't think they're going to have the staying power that Total Recall had, and that's something unique to Paul Verhoeven too, as a director, is he has such a unique style, and there's been people that have tried to copy it and they just can't do it. They do a very poor job at it, or they miss the point entirely. And there really hasn't been anybody that's come around that's been done where I go to myself, I'm like, oh yeah, that's Paul Verhoeven done really well. I haven't seen it yet.
Well, what's a Paul Verhoeven movie? Because he's rather eclectic. I mean, RoboCop and Total Recall have the elements that they have, the hyper violence, the almost cartoonish level violence, but shown realistically, the excellent sci-fi concept or premise that's explored. But then didn't he do like Basic Instinct and Showgirls and these hypersexual murder mysteries and stuff like that? What's the common thread that runs throughout all his films that you admire?
Well, I would break those two things into like separate categories in terms of he has the smart B sci-fi movie next to none, right? RoboCop, Total Recall, Starship Troopers, those are all classics, cult classics, and I don't think anyone's ever really going to be able to match them in terms of being the smart B sci-fi action movie. And to be honest with you, I haven't really seen any that come close, especially to Starship Troopers, which is just so brilliant on so many levels. And then he has, as you pointed out, he did Basic Instinct, which was, for what it was, brilliantly done movie, right? It's just fun. Showgirls is, it was a risk, and it was a risk that didn't pay off. But it's considered a cult classic now. People have looked back at it and go, you know what? It didn't work fully, but I think people were a little too harsh on it at the time. And there's also Hollow Man too, which I thought was pretty well done myself.
I didn't know he did that. The one with Kevin Bacon?
Yeah.
I actually thought that was a really good thriller, a really good sci-fi thriller. I liked it.
Yeah, it was kind of like a mix of between like his kind of Basic Instinct stuff and sci-fi stuff, because there's kind of like little... I found it was like kind of like a bridge between the two. That was the last movie he ended up doing in the United States, and he ended up going back to Denmark. I mean, Paul Verhoeven's an interesting guy in general, right? He was part of, I believe it was like a Society of Jesus or something like that, where it was like a group of scholars that were trying to find the historical Jesus. Steve might know a little bit more about this. And he was the only non-academic that was on that panel of people and it was around for quite some time. It's interesting because you never can quite figure out what Paul Verhoeven is exactly thinking in his movies, where you can watch Starship Troopers and you go, it's like, oh man, this guy's like totally making fun of fascism. But he's making fun of it in such a way that he's making it seem like it's a fun idea. Do you know do you understand what I'm saying? Like he grew up in Denmark. He was quite young too when he was during World War II. So he experienced like Nazism like firsthand. And I've always found it interesting where you even something like RoboCop, you look at RoboCop and you go, well, he's definitely making like authoritarian fascism look somewhat appealing, right? Like, RoboCop's cool. And I think maybe that's the point.
He wasn't a member of the Society of Jesus. That's the Jesuits. He was a member of the Jesus Seminar, which was quite different. Yeah. And
that is very
we could
different.
be here for 4 hours if we wanted to go down that road. But
I think you could sum them up by saying that they concluded that of all the words attributed to Jesus in the gospel, there were like 2 that they feel like he actually said, right? That's kind of their stance. So that kind of lets you know where they're coming from.
A very interesting organization.
Well, for this movie, he obviously it was a straightforward action. I mean, I just watched it like less than a week ago with my wife to prepare for this, and it's action packed from like I mean, the very first scene onward. I don't think there's a quiet scene in the entire movie, or at least it doesn't stay quiet. I mean, it gets loud at some point in just about every scene, which is great. It's adrenaline packed. But even though that's the way he made that movie, and that's what, the experience is as you sit there and watch it, he also kind of weaves a pretty deep philosophical, conundrum into this movie. I mean, the very essence of reality. I mean, Chris and I just finished a 5-part series on True Detective where the idea of consciousness is discussed quite a lot. But I think Verhoeven is exploring that a little bit here. I mean, it's not just, is he dreaming or not? I mean, it's almost a question of what makes us who we are. I mean, there's a scene near the end, and I know we haven't even done the summary yet, but I'm assuming most people have seen this film. There's a scene at the end where Cohagen says to Quaid how, you're Hauser. And he says, no, I'm Quaid now. I think that's an important line in this movie. And I think it drives home that idea that Verhoeven is exploring here about, how Aristotle says we are what we repeatedly do. And that would mean that Quaid, is pretty much a creep because that's what Hauser's done repeatedly. And yet at the same time, he has this opportunity because he doesn't know about his other self to be his truer self or his truest self. So I don't know, not to get all existent or not to get all, woo woo or whatever, but I think on underneath the layers of this really awesome, fun visual spectacle of a movie, with some very attractive women in it, and some really good prosthetics for the 90s. It's pretty impressive what they're able to do with the mutants. Underneath all of that, I think there's a pretty neat philosophical question going on.
Yeah, I thought that was the thing that really stuck with me when I watched it this last time in preparation for this episode was your memories are who you are. And when you lose that link to your memories, that is probably that's the thing that probably is the most terrifying thing for almost anyone. If you have dementia or that you're starting to lose that your identity is through your memories and that you're in this futuristic time frame, that if your memories can be altered in a way that change who you fundamentally are, that is a really terrifying thing. If you really if you go into maybe go watch it out there for the people, if it's your 100th time, go think about it at that time, this next time you watch it, of your memories being changed. And what would that be like in your life? And people are doing it casually there for a vacation.
Yeah. Yeah. If you can choose to have your memories changed, then clearly someone can choose to change your memories for you. Yeah. And therein lies the danger. Blake Crouch is a sci-fi author who's written a number of really good books. Dark Matter was really, really good. And he wrote Wayward Pines that the series was based on.
Great writer. Yeah.
Yeah. That was that one fooled me. The premise, I didn't figure it out till they told me. And that rarely happens. But he wrote a book, a couple of years ago called Recursion. And that explores this idea of memory and how very literally what you said, Steve, that, we are, what we are because of our memories. I never really thought about it in quite so stark terms until I read that book and I realized how that's exactly true. But in this case, because Quaid doesn't have memories of being a bad man, he has the option of being a good man, which moves us into the realm of, there's always hope, right? You can always change your ways. There's always, a chance for redemption.
Yeah, I have to second Blake Crouch. He has a Philip K. Dick feeling to him. I had just discovered Wayward Pines, and then I gobbled up that entire series. And then I went in a summer and read every single book he wrote because it was just, they were out of this world.
I met him at one of the writers' conferences. I think it was Left Coast Crime, Vancouver, that I met him at. and just a super nice, down to earth guy, and very unassuming. Like the incredibly dark and twisted things that show up in his books do not rest on his shoulders or his face for the world to see, which is probably a good thing. But yeah, if you dig that kind of stuff, he's somebody definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, I read the Wayward Pine series, and you telling me to read it, Steve, and I liked it. To me, when it was revealed, like the big reveal or what have you, I don't want to ruin the book for anybody else. I was not disappointed. I was just, because I didn't know what was going to happen, and once it was kind of revealed, it was all right. And then the story changes, like the exactly what it is. Does that make sense to you, Frank?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, it's your entire understanding of what you're watching is set on its ear. And I'm trying to think of other shows or movies that have done that. The John Sayles movie Limbo does that in less dramatic terms, more grounded terms, but it makes you think it's going to be one kind of a movie and becomes another. Can you guys think of any other examples where? The vampire one with Salma Hayek and Danny Trejo and Harvey Keitel from Dusk Till Dawn.
Oh yeah,
you think that's going to be a Quentin Tarantino movie, with bad guys and just another Reservoir Dogs sort of thing? And spoiler alert, but halfway through they end up at a biker bar that's actually a vampire haven. It becomes a horror movie, and it's not like at the 10-minute mark either. It's like at the 40-minute mark, midway through the film. Do we want to give a quick rundown of the plot for people that haven't seen it, or do we just want to jump into what happens and our thoughts on it, since everybody's probably seen it?
Well, I might suggest people go listen to the last one, and we did a pretty good rundown of the plot there. And as I always suggest, watch the movie. In this case, watch the movie on a yearly basis, and even a couple of times a year, and then listen to these episodes, and then go watch the movie again. Do you have a particular theme you want to do? What do you think?
Apparently, David Cronenberg at one point was set to direct this movie. He did like script rewrites. Apparently, he had started shooting some stuff, and him and the producer just had creative differences. David Cronenberg envisioned a film that was like much more closer in tone to Blade Runner, in terms of seriousness and everything like that. And Arnold just didn't see it that way. He wanted to make a fun kind of popcorn movie. So that he ended up stepping out, and he was going to get sued actually, because apparently he was contractually obligated to direct this movie, and they settled it out saying, I'll direct something else for the studio. And that was bygones be bygones. It'd be interesting to see what Cronenberg would have done with this movie, because he did something similar later in his career with it was Existence.
Oh, that was a good movie.
Did he have anything to do with the prosthetics for the mutants in this movie then? Because like he had several movies that made use of that. I mean, The Fly and all these other ones. The ones in this movie had a very Cronenberg feel to them.
In the script rewrites, he added the mutants. So that's a little bit of a David Cronenberg influence right there. And just another thing, I didn't realize how much of influence Arnold had on this movie. Like, I knew he started and everything like that, but he was really passionate about this project, and he was the guy that actually really pushed to get Paul Verhoeven hired to direct the film. At the time, Paul Verhoeven had done RoboCop, which was, it was a hit, right? But he still was a pretty kind of unknown director, right? From Denmark. And it was Arnold Schwarzenegger that insisted that he get the role. The job to direct the movie. I hadn't known that before, which is interesting. And it's interesting that I don't think they ever worked again after this film, which is kind of bizarre, because this was one of Arnold's biggest hits. They seem to work really well together. Paul Verhoeven's movies just kind of lend themselves to, an Arnold driven picture. I just thought that was interesting that Arnold had that much control of what was going on behind the scenes with the movie.
How many movies had Arnold made to this point? I mean, this was 87, right? Terminator came out in 82, so there's 5 years. I mean, he must have made a couple of 3 movies in that time frame. He was a big enough star, I think, to kind of have that influence, it seems like.
Steve here. We are a member of the Parthenon Podcast Network, featuring great shows like James Early's Key Battles of American History podcast and many other great shows. Go over to parthenonpodcast.com to learn more. And here is a quick word from our sponsors.
I'd have to look into it, but I don't think Brad Pitt can be I'm not doing this movie unless the guy's directing it. It's
I don't know. I think when you hit a certain level of appeal of bankability, I think is really what it probably comes down to for the people making the movies. What will put butts in the seats? What will get people to watch the stream? A certain amount of leverage comes with that, and if you're not asking for your cousin Lenny, who once took a film class at community college to be the director, but an established director within the industry, I don't know that it's that. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't surprise me that he would have that kind of leverage. I think there were fewer movies being made then, and because there were fewer outlets, because there wasn't 800 streaming services and all that. And so because there were fewer movies, I think that just the laws of scarcity gave the people involved in the movie making, more leverage if they had leverage. And I should look it up, but I bet you Arnold had 2 or 3 big hits between the Terminator movie and then this. Feel like Commando was already out.
Yeah, it looks like between 1982 and then Total Recall comes out in 1990, pretty much once or twice a year, he had a pretty big hit. There was Commando was in there, the Terminator, Conan, the 2 Conan movies.
Both Conans.
Twins. I don't remember if Twins was I think it was a fairly big theatrical hit.
Yeah, it got some play.
Raw Deal. That's actually one of my more favorite movies of his. It never quite rose to the top, but I thought that was really good. And I know it was a pretty big hit at the time. I think 1986. So, and The Running Man. The Running Man was really good too.
Yeah.
So he had a bunch of hits right in that time. So I could imagine he had some figurative and literal to throw around.
Well, in The Running Man, that I forgot about that, but that shows he could succeed in science fiction too. So, kind of removes that concern. So Predator was after this.
Yeah, I think it came out in 91, maybe.
Oh, you guys got that. Predator came out before. Predator came out in 87.
Yeah, so he's got arguably two sci-fi movies to his credit before he's going to make this one. So, yeah, I think he was as big or bigger than Stallone. And I don't think there was a bigger action star at the time. So I totally believe he could have said, yeah, I want to make this, but I think Paul Verhoeven should direct. And unless you think he's going to blow it, well, keep Arnold happy, because one thing that these producers are always thinking about, if they're smart, isn't just the movie they're making. It's the next movie and the movie after that. And there are movies that have been made to placate this director, that actor, that this producer, or whatever, so that they'd make it the next one that they really wanted them to make. That's happened.
So I guess we can just kind of get into some of the major themes that I pulled out was memories as a commodity. It sounds ridiculous on the face of it, but that's basically what this Total Recall is, right? It's like going to a grocery store and just buying different memories. Immediately right off the bat, how do you guys feel about that?
Well, the short story it's based on is called "We'll Remember It For You Wholesale."
Yeah.
I mean, so that's exactly what it's totally a commodity. So I think it is. And I'm still just really this old idea of we are our memories. Our memories are how we identify ourselves is just fascinating to me. So, I'm with you on this one. I think it's, very much a theme.
See, people will initially, I think they'll get this idea of like revulsion, like how can you go to like a store or something or change somebody's memories? Like you can't do that, right? But I'll use like a couple examples of say where it gets a little bit murky. Now, we had just finished doing a series on True Detective, and there's the two kids that were in the compound, right? Now, Frank, if you had the ability to go, hey, we have this thing that will erase your memories of that entirely, that happened, and we're going to replace them with good memories, would you do it?
If I were one of the kids, or if somebody said I could do that for that, I guess only one of the kids survived. So
yeah,
for the young girl that survived. So which way? Am I the young girl or am I the guardian of the young girl?
The guardian of the young girl.
Yeah, I'm taking her memories all the way back to what I think would be her last happy memory, because she's catatonic, and when she isn't catatonic, she's horrified. So to me, that's a perfectly ethical application of the technology.
Okay, I'll use another example that's maybe not as extreme. You have a drug
You
addict.
didn't get the answer you wanted.
No, I'm just to kind of show you like where it's not as, I don't think it's as clear cut as people think it is though. Like, okay, so you have a drug addict, right?
Oh, I agree. It's not totally not. You're 100% correct. It's not.
They've tried rehab, they tried treatment, they've tried everything, and this person just can't seem to break the habit. Now, if you had the ability, or this person had the choice, let's say, to go back in time, erase their memory of the first time that they ever took a hit or whatever drug that they're addicted to, right? And then give them memories of having an absolute revulsion to drugs. Would that not be an effective treatment for drug addicts?
Sure.
Is it ethical to do that though? To just replace?
Are you forcing it on them, or are they agreeing to it, or is it part of a sentence for crimes they've committed because of drug use?
Let's say that, yeah, part of a sentence, right?
I guess that comes down to what you want my answer, or do you want to discuss it? I mean, my answer is I think I would do it. I think it's in society's best interest and their best interest. But, if somebody wanted to argue against it, they could do so with a convincing argument as well.
What's your opinion on this, Steve?
One thing that they explored in the book, even though the short story, you can read it in about an hour, but they did explore this idea that you can't completely, sometimes you can't erase a memory and it's just completely wiped out like a computer. You can't necessarily erase emotion. So just because you've erased like with that girl, I don't know the exact scene you're talking about in that movie, but you might be able to erase the memory of that, but you're probably not going to be able to erase the emotion that's baked into a different way. So maybe they do, I guess where we could say that there's a technology that could erase the emotion as well, but some things are baked in differently than just strictly memory. Like with your drug example, if somebody's inclined towards drugs, just because you erase that memory doesn't mean that they might not seek out that behavior again.
Especially if it was in response to particular trauma.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, right. What I'm trying to get to though is like there's certain examples where people will go, yeah, that's probably a good idea, right? And then as you go further down the ladder, people get less and less inclined that this is a good idea, right? Or say you have somebody who's like suffering from depression, right?
Mm-hmm.
And let's say you can erase the event that's like whatever it's been causing their depression, and then being able to fill it up with happy memories, right? And then you keep on doing this say, and it keeps on going down the ladder, right? At what point do you go that, no, that we can't be doing this? At what point does it become unethical?
Well, I mean, if you think about it, the perfect example for what you're talking about is Hauser. Like, he's been a complete tool. You know, he's a right-hand man for a despot, essentially, right? And in the few interactions we get to see on the film where he's on video, he's completely unlikable and unethical and a jerk. And yet that guy he did go to essentially recall, right? A recall technology, and had his memories changed to turn him into Quaid. Now, he did it for the reasons that we all know he did it. But, you know, what if you were a total jerk your entire life? You abandoned your family. You beat your wife. You abused your kids. You stole from your job. You killed somebody in an alley and never got caught. And then you just get to saunter right in to recall and sit down and say, yeah, I want to be a guy who was commercial fisherman and everybody likes him. You walk out. Now you're Jake, headed to your boat to do some more fishing, and everybody likes you because that's what you remember, and what we remember is what we are. I mean, is that ethical? No, hell no. It's not. Well, it's not fair anyway, whether it's ethical or not. And that's what Hauser's doing, and of course, he's doing it again for another step further, right? He's looking to accomplish his own end, and he plans on coming back around and becoming himself again. But I don't know. I mean, anytime a new technology comes along, it usually comes along with a great application, and very quickly it gets perverted into wrong applications or not so great applications, because we humans are, that's our MO. That's our MO. You know, I mean, somebody invents a camera and to record, things, and pretty soon people are taking naked pictures. I mean, it's
Yeah,
just
exactly.
the way we are, right? It's the way we are. Nothing wrong with naked pictures, but I'm just saying that wasn't why they made the camera. The camera, it's the internet's an even better example. It was not made for what it is frequently used for, to seek out pornography. But that's what ends up happening. So I think that would happen with these memories that you're talking about. I think people would very quickly start doing unethical things. And yet the argument is it unethical as a technology because it can be unethically applied if it also has good applications? I mean, morphine has a purpose, but heroin is, used for a bad purpose, we would argue most of the time. So it's kind of that you bring up, Chris, a very old and very important argument discussion about technology, I think.
Well, one thing that we scratched at a little bit in the last episode, and I think it does apply to this ethical issue. Think about it the way that Quaid was initially using it. He was bored in his job and he just wanted to have a vacation that he couldn't afford any other way. But his vacation is this bizarre fantasy of going to Mars to go hook up with this other girl and like save the alliance and all that. And my thought was, and they didn't really explain it in the movie, is when he comes out of recall, is he supposed to think that this literally happened to him? Or is this almost like a memory planted in there as a standalone thing? Oh, I did this almost like a cosplay. Because that's what they showed that in the commercials for Recall, that it's basically just a cheap way to go on a vacation. I can't afford to go to Paris for vacation, but I can get this memory implanted that I actually went there. Okay, you could do that. But then how do you explain it to all your other friends? Oh, I was in Paris for 2 weeks. No, you weren't. You were working this last week. Like that's the one thing I did. I don't really understand.
There'd be some dissonance there because the salesman tells Quaid, your mind won't know the difference. So basically, you're going to seem crazy to all your friends. I'm going to be sitting here telling you, Chris, dude, yeah, I went to Mars. You'd be like, No, you didn't. We were recording True Detective on Sunday. I was looking right at you, No, dude, I went to Mars. I remember.
Yeah, look I have a souvenir. They said that.
Here's the souvenir. For just a few credits more.
Well, it's funny. Like they mention like sometimes the recalls don't take, and people go through what did they call it? Schizoid embolism. That would happen in real life, right? Like that was the case where everyone's like, "What are you talking about? You didn't go to Mars." It's like, what are you talking about? Trust me, I've been to Mars. Like I can tell you all the details. Like I was a secret agent. I shot these people up and yada, yada, yada. And people were like explaining it's like, well, no, there was no secret agent. I can show you last week's news, and you would have a psychotic break if the implant was as here as they say, because it'd be like talking quite literally to a schizophrenic person. Like this is why we can't hold schizophrenic people like accountable for certain crimes that they commit if they do commit crimes, because they're living in a different reality than everybody else, right? They're seeing things or hearing things that are not real. This is what would happen with an individual. It's interesting to think, like, just because like a society has like the technology to be able to do something, should they do it? Like over here we have this weird, in the West we have this weird thing with technology where it's just like, oh well, any technology is good technology. Just throw it out there and then we'll deal with it later. It's, even if we had the ability to do this, should we even do it? Like this should be like something like, oh, okay, whatever. We can do it, but we're not gonna release it on the public. I tend to feel the same way with virtual reality, where I'm super concerned about virtual reality in terms of, especially like video gaming, right? Like video gaming addiction is a real thing, and then you add like virtual reality on top of it, and I'm afraid you're going to have like huge segments of the population that just won't leave their house, and they're just going to be stuck in this like virtual reality for forever, right? Playing games. Like I'm actually legitimately concerned about that, but I guess that's somewhat of a tangent, but it does apply, right?
Well, it's the today equivalent of Recall. I mean, it's not a video game implant, but I have a VR headset. My wife and I got them a couple of years ago, and I messed around with it for a couple of months and played some games, and I haven't since. And I haven't really figured out why, but I will tell you that it's pretty cool. But I was playing this one game where you are basically supposed to try to stay alive as long as possible with zombies attacking, and they give you like a weapon of choice and everything. So it's just one of those kind of games. And I'm sitting there going ping, 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 shooting my 45 and looking around. And then I look over my shoulder and there's a zombie standing behind me with his arms reached out, his mouth open, like clawing at me, made me jump about 6 feet in the air. And it was nighttime when I was playing, and my wife wasn't here either. So I was all by my lonesome and scared. But I'll tell you what, it was realistic enough. I was like, holy, I mean, I had an adrenaline dump, and I don't get an adrenaline dump, playing even an action game or whatever on the, on classic video gaming, right, on the TV or something. So it is I guess my point is it's very, very immersive. And it's all relative too. I got one that we picked up was a Star Wars, sort of vignette, like a short story game, it wasn't very long, but pretty early in the game, you are standing there like you're a prisoner of these stormtroopers, and all of a sudden Darth Vader walks in, and David Prowse, who played Darth Vader, I think is like 6'2" or something like that. Darth Vader's tall. He was tall in the game. Like I'm not that tall. And so I was left to almost crane my neck to look up at this guy. He was imposing as hell. And it's all, like I said, it's very, very immersive. So this was like 2 or 3 years ago. I haven't played it since. I can only imagine if we got to the point you're talking about, Chris, where you where the plugging in is less obtrusive and it's even more immersive. And maybe they find ways to engage more than just your visual and audio. If they can engage you in terms of your sense of feel, like if you put on wristbands or whatever. I don't know how they would do it, but it could get extremely immersive. And yeah, we could see people doing a Douglas Quaid, and this is how they're getting their vacation or their entertainment. Maybe they just don't want to come home.
Steve here with a quick word from our sponsors.
Well, that's exactly it, right? And I'm sitting there, I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, imagine if they could do like a VR, but the game is like a really cool detective story. Something, I don't know, we just did True Detective. Let's just say that, right? Like you get to play Rust Cole in a VR. And I'm sitting there, I'm sitting there, I'm thinking to myself, I mean, man, I'd love to do that. Like I could totally see how somebody they would completely lose themselves in it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, quite literally, we have video games where people, I don't know if it's still popular now, but you remember back in the day, it was called Sims, where people would just like kind of build houses, and it's like they're literally like living a life, like they're living like a life. And this is just kind of like the video game, right? Like my word, like if they were to ever release this technology out to the general public, it would just be a free for all where I don't think anybody would be able to know anybody at all, because everyone would be talking about these memories that, what are you talking about? Like like your own mother talking to you. It's like, no. You never went here. Like what sister died or something? Like just say like, like the goth kid or whatever. It's like, oh, I want something actually traumatic to happen in my life so I can legitimately be like depressed. It's like, oh, I'm just going to add a memory that I had a sister that died or something, because this would happen. Not necessarily people would just fill it up with good memories. People would just fill it up with memories of, I don't know, whatever they feel like having their identity to be at that time, at that any given moment.
And they would interact with the rest of the world as if that were absolutely the truth of what had happened. And that would cause some interesting problems. It's a fascinating. I mean, this is the kind of things that Philip K. Dick did in all of his short stories virtually. I mean, these kinds of questions and these kinds of discussions are born out of those questions. And that was one of the reasons why I think he's right up there with, Heinlein and Asimov and the other biggies of the classic era of science fiction.
Yeah, that's what great science fiction does, is take that little kernel and plant it and play with that idea. Total Recall, nothing else is really absurd. A Mars colony isn't that far outside of reality. It's that one plot device that just really, that they build everything around. And I think that's another thing that really made this movie so incredible, is that it built everything around that one plot device, and it didn't throw in too many different silly things or ridiculous things. It went with that one thing.
Did you guys in the first episode discuss, break down, argue about the elements that point to whether it was real or a dream?
Yeah, but I think it's worth talking about again.
Yeah, well, I haven't listened to that episode. I've listened to a lot of Beyond the Big Screen episodes, but I don't remember that one. So how did you guys land on that first episode? And is it the same for you now?
Really, in that episode, we discussed a couple of different elements, but I think let's start off with you. What, after, as an aficionado of the movie, what did you count? At least after your last viewing, because I know it changes for me every time I watch it. After your last viewing, was it real?
I came down, you see, like you said, I go back and forth, but I came down that it was a dream. And that's been, I would say, my most consistent reason. But my wife and I talked about this when we watched it, because I told her, obviously, that it was going to come up. And she's like, yeah, that's like the big question of the movie, right? Of course. And the one thing that she pointed out that really, and I guess it did for Quaid too, really made it seem like it wasn't a dream was when the doctor from Recall shows up at the Hilton there and tries to get him to take the pill, and Quaid notices that he's sweating, and she's like, why would he be sweating? That's obviously it's not a dream, And I wasn't convinced by that. I think that works from a filmmaking and storytelling standpoint. It's a great red herring and or clue to the truth, depending on where you land. But I don't think it's definitive. I mean, if he's in a dream that's meant to be real, of course the guy standing there trying to convince him not to shoot him is going to sweat. So I didn't find that compelling. Was that a big moment for either one of you?
I think for me, it wasn't the fact that the sweating was a secondary, that he was bluffing. Now, I think that's what's probably the best thing about this movie is anything you can take in either way. Would a guy be bluffing like that? Well, if it was designed as a computer program to be a memory that you're trying to be tricked as a secret agent, then yeah, sure, it's a part of the dream. And I think that for me, on that one, I fell towards it being reality just because the guy was bluffing so hard to get him to go back to Recall. That seemed to me like real, but I think that on the opposite side, you could easily say that it was a part of a Recall program of a Martian spy.
Well, I mean, I guess the other thing that really makes it hard for me to believe that he's not actually dreaming is, are we correct in believing for the purposes of this film that everything they show us before him sitting down in the chair at Recall and getting the first shot, that is trustworthy narrative, that we can trust that as being reality? Is that a fair premise? Does anybody disagree with that?
I do. I think the whole thing right from the opening shot is that this is all Recall.
Okay. But he goes to Recall in his dream then, is what you're saying?
No, I think the whole, like, right from the get-go, like, it's set up that, oh, you're going to be like this kind of lonely construction worker that ends up, he's going to find out that you're actually a secret agent. And he goes to like the Recall Center. Like, this is all part of his Recall. Like, this is all just part of this same Recall story. Like, I don't think any of it is real.
So really? That's an interesting take. I'd never thought of it that way, because I mean, he goes into Recall and then that's where, things change, right? That's where things change in the movie. Well, under your theory, the fact that like Sharon Stone makes a really weird face when she isn't looking at him when he's hugging her, she makes an expression that is kind of telling, I think. I noticed that when I watched it this last time. And that's before he ever goes to Recall. Now, obviously, if you're right and he's already under somehow, then that's all part of the the secret agent fantasy and everything. But if we go with, go back to you, Steve, then what do you think of that premise that everything before he sits in the Recall chair and gets a shot is trustworthy storytelling? Do you agree or disagree?
I think I agree with that. I think that there's something compelling about Chris's idea that it's all dream, but it makes me, I guess, feel more comfortable with the movie that everything before the Recall is reliable.
Well, if you accept that, and you don't have to, obviously, but if you accept that, I mean, we see the picture of Melina in the program. Blue skies on Mars, he says. That's something new. And all of the other stuff that happens in the movie is referred to in some fashion in the sales pitch and all of that. And so I don't, to me, especially seeing Melina, I don't see how that's a hell of a coincidence. If he's been dreaming about her, Well, actually, that's interesting because if he's been dreaming about her already, then that lends some credence to what Chris is saying, that it's already part of his programming, because he is dreaming about Melina before he goes there. But then Melina's picture is the one that pops up when he talks about his ideal mate. And then that's who he ends up being with when he's, after all things go sideways. So it's an interesting, I don't know. What do you guys think?
One thing that's interesting about when he saw Melina is it looks like the point of view of the camera is as Quaid. So I wonder when he's looking at the screen, if we're supposed to be looking at that from his point of view, and he's like projecting Melina, the memory that he has, onto the screen.
Onto the archetype, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I could buy that.
It's like you pointed out, though, Frank. He's dreaming about Mars already, right from the get-go. He's dreaming about that girl right from the get-go. And the conversation that we're having right now, I think, to me, this is why at least my theory is so brilliant. And at least I think it's so brilliant.
It's so brilliant. We're going to call this the humility theory.
Yeah.
No, but I think this is why the whole recall concept, it works so well, because you think about it, you would like to think that at least a part of this film took place in reality, right? If you go with my theory, none of it took place in reality, right? Which is exactly what recall is supposed to do, is it not? You're not supposed to be able to tell the difference between the two.
And so neither can the viewer. That's an interesting take. So then we're to believe that the implant took place before the opening credits, before the opening scene. Okay. I don't think you can refute that. If that's what you choose to believe, everything supports it. I can't refute that. I think it's a very interesting take.
The one thing that confused me, and I couldn't build a timeline to make it work, is you get the video recording of Hauser talking to Quaid right when he finds that thing to take the probe out of his nose, and he's telling Quaid how Hauser is telling Quaid. So it's Hauser is in the past, some indistinct time in the past, telling Quaid about how to save Mars and to be basically pro-mutants. But then there's that scene where they show another video recording of Hauser, and he's all chummy with Cohagen. And I can't figure out how to square those two and how they would happen, that Hauser's chummy, and then Hauser is, it's what point were these videos recorded that Hauser would have had his
they're all
break?
made at the same time. I think they recorded them all at the same time. I think they said, I see Cohagen and Hauser saying, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to wipe your memory. We're going to put an implant in. We're going to send you down with one of our operatives. And that will allow you to get to past Quado and his ability to sniff out our guys, because you won't even know you're you, but we'll have, what's her name? Lori, guide you basically. And they're like, all right, well, let's make a couple of videos before we do that, and then he makes the save yourself, save me video for Quaid. And then they make the, you're an idiot, and we tricked you video with Cohagen. Cause I think he's wearing the same clothes and everything, right?
Yeah. So Hauser was always a deep fake baddie for Cohagen.
That's how I read it. Yeah. That's how I take it. I think I read the story such a long time ago, Steve. Is that element in the story, the Cohagen Hauser stuff?
No, that wasn't in there. The basic premise of the book was that the Quaid character was an assassin who was, killed a Cohagen type character, and then they wiped his memory, because it was like an alliance thing or something. It was similar, but there wasn't this whole thing, the deep fake to become a mole inside of the resistance or anything like that. It was a little flatter than that.
Well, this isn't the only time that he's messed with memories. If you think about it, Philip K. Dick. I mean, Paycheck is all about memory wipe and finding out what you forgot. And really, in a way, Minority Report sort of doesn't deal with memories exactly. I guess future memories, if I want to stretch it a little bit. But this is a recurring theme for him, and I mean, he deals with it in Blade Runner a little bit too, right? Implanted memories to give the replicants a sense of self, and Rachel, it works for Rachel. She believes that she's not a replicant until after her encounter with Deckard. So it's obviously something that he was very interested in, and he pulls it off in this movie really, really well. Did you guys see any other things that tip it for you one way or the other? I mean, Chris's theory, the whole movie proves it. So I mean, can't really argue anymore about that. But if you go from the recall point forward being potentially a dream or potentially real, were there other things that tipped it one way or the other for you?
For the whole plan to trigger off, he has to go to recall, right? Like Cohagen's plan.
No. I think that screwed his plan up. He was never supposed to go to recall. That screwed up the implant that they had already put in there. So that was a colossal mistake, or the opposite of serendipity, I guess. That's how I read it. So I think that's where things went off the rails for him. If we're going to go with the idea that this is real,
yeah.
I mean, that's why Harry told him not to go and all of that. So and it was because he already had an implant. His reaction to that is what had him, have a meltdown and go crazy and have them have to do the things they did, throw him in the Johnny cab and all that.
Well, they had sent him back to Earth because he did flip on Mars.
Where do you get that from, Steve? I must have missed it, I guess.
Why would they have sent him back to Earth?
So I think what they did was they concocted the plan. They erased his memories, or gave him the implant to cap his memories so that they could uncap him later, right? They sent him down to Earth, put him in place with Laurie and who's the construction buddy, Harry, I think.
Harry, yeah.
To watch over him. And the idea was that he'd get a little bit of a cover story there, and then he'd go to Mars with Laurie and Harry or whoever to help him out to get him there, and he'd infiltrate the mutants and get to Quato, and Quato wouldn't be able to detect it because he'd think he was the real deal. I don't think they planned for him to go to recall.
It kicked it all too fast.
Yeah. And gave him a glimpse of who he really was, maybe, or made them worry that he knew. I mean, the Michael Ironside character says as much, right? That's where the title gets dropped inside the narrative, where he doesn't know anything now, but in an hour he could have total recall. He saw one to snuff him out. Yeah, I guess I'm sticking pretty hard to this idea that it wasn't a dream. I'm not going to smacking at you guys with a stick every time you say something. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Steve, or Chris, rather.
No, but my point, though, is for him to get triggered, so he has to go to the recall, and then the whole thing gets triggered off. And then this is why Quato and them end up believing that he's the real deal. None of that happens unless he goes to the recall. Yet they're stopping him from going to the recall?
Yeah, I disagree with your first part of your premise. I don't think it has to happen that way. I don't think it was intended to happen that way. I think he was supposed to go to Mars and get involved and not have his memory cap messed with by recall.
I suppose, right? But like his friend wasn't telling him to, hey, go take a trip to Mars. He was just saying, just don't go to recall.
You're saying they wanted to pop his memory cap at their choosing, but he must have Quaid/Hauser must have been deep infiltrated into the resistance before, because he wouldn't have had all of those memories.
Melina, right?
Yeah, he wouldn't have known who Melina was and had all those dreams about her. Steve here again with a quick word from our sponsors.
Yeah, and so because he believed himself to be Quaid, the sense that Quado is able to do would ring true because he'd be sent. I think he's an empath. That's how I interpret him. I think he's more of an empath than anything when it comes to people anyway. And so he would be able to feel the truth of Quaid because Quaid only remembers himself being Quaid, and we are what we remember, right? We've talked about that. So then it would work. And then once they get in, they had other obviously Benny or was it Benny?
Yeah.
I think that, he was another operative who was supposed to help out, and his job was to do what he actually did, which was assassinate Quado. So Quaid's job was to get him inside. And that could only happen if they believed Quaid to be pure of heart, essentially, or pure of intent. And that's what the memory cap did. So him going to recall screwed it all up. And could have kept him from getting close to Quado, because if he started remembering things, and, it was definitely not what they had planned. At least that's how I interpret it. Somebody listening could probably be sitting there shaking their head going, no, because XYZ. And if you have that point, put it in the comments, let us know. I mean, this
absolutely.
is just one mope's opinion that I'm trying to beat these guys into submission, and they're not having it. You can see their expressions. They're like, as soon as you're done talking, I'm going to bitch slap you with truth, buddy. Here it comes.
Yeah, you're not going. I'm almost 100% convinced this is all just a recall. I think that's why the movie works so brilliantly, is because
we can have this argument
35 years later.
The fact that we can have this argument, that's how good it was, how well they did making it. I totally agree.
Well, and this is what a recall would be like, and one of the interesting things about this film too is kind of like the nature of reality. Now people think like reality, whatever, that's simple enough, right? Like, if I can feel it, touch it, hear it, smell it, yeah, that's reality, right? But once you actually really start getting into it, it becomes more and more difficult to actually prove what's real or not real, especially outside your own mind. Now, say, whatever, I'm married to this woman for 30 plus years, right? And I get into a car accident and I die, right? The lights are off. There's nothing there, right? How can I prove that anything that I experienced outside of my own mind is actually there?
Yeah. You're running down Descartes Lane right now, right?
Stop and really stop and think about it for a minute. And you start realizing just how difficult it is to actually prove existence outside of your own mind. Like these memories that get implanted in Quaid or whoever, they're fake. They're not real, right? But if they're in your mind and you're remembering them, then of course they're real, right? But how else would you be able to prove that they're not real?
Yeah, you're talking about perception and about, our own consciousness and our own sense of reality. But you don't even, and that's some deep stuff. You don't even have to go that deep though to start hitting on some of this stuff. I mean, look at the film Regarding Henry that Harrison Ford was in back in the I think around this same time ish, maybe a little later. Are you guys familiar with that one?
Yeah.
I mean, the character of, in a nutshell, the character of Henry is kind of is Harrison Ford's character. He's kind of a typical kind of unlikable business person who's had an affair on his wife. He wears his hair Gordon Gekko style, he's kind of arrogant, and he goes in to get some cream or something or some whatever at the deli and interrupts a robbery and gets shot in the head. And the brain injury that bullet causes has an impact on his personality. He doesn't just have to relearn motor skills, but it actually affects his memory and his personality. And he's a completely different person. a completely different person. And it's a good movie. It's pretty based in reality. I mean, brain injuries are weird and things happen. There's a funny scene where his kid spills some orange juice, and you can see by the look on his kid's face that would have got him yelled at before, maybe smacked even, like the kid's just horror struck and staring at Henry. And he goes, "Oh, it's all right. It happens to me all the time." And then the kid's eyes get wide, like, I can't believe that's what he just said. And then he says, "See?" And he knocks his own glass over and spills everywhere. And then it's just so nonchalant about it. I mean, it's like a 180 personality wise. And he forgets the fact that he was cheating on his wife. And then he discovers that he was, and then he discovers that his wife was cheating on him. And it's this big, long, it's worth watching. I didn't ruin it for you. There's still plenty there. The point is, who is he? Is he the guy that was, or is he the guy that is? And it's kind of the same thing as we ask ourselves with the memories, like, is he Quaid, or is he Hauser? Well, I think most people would argue that at the end of the movie, he's Quaid, right? I mean, he's made a choice.
There's another movie that sort of explores that too. It's Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind with Jim Carrey and Kate Winslet, and Elijah Wood was in it too. He was really good.
Is that good?
And,
is that a good movie?
Yeah, the basic premise is something very much like Recall, where there's this company, and it's not super sci-fi. That's in this movie. That's really the MacGuffin. It's just like a box that they wheel in, and then they move past that. But it basically is almost like cut and delete memories out of your mind, and most people use it to take out relationships. So this woman wants a Kate Winslet character. And it's interesting because I think it goes back to one of the points Chris was making earlier in the conversation. She's just basically sick of Jim Carrey. She wants to break up with him, and she's very impulsive. So she calls this company, and without even talking to him about breaking up or trying to do anything better, she just wants to have him deleted from her memory. And after the procedure is done, he doesn't exist to her, but he's a total wreck. And I haven't seen this movie in probably 15 years. I think the last time I saw it was in the theater when it came out. But think about how that would happen if you can just totally erase somebody from your mind, but everybody else knows all of this context and background around you. And one of the big things of that movie is that you don't erase the emotion behind it. That once she starts to meet him again, then she feels that emotion again. And that makes you have to think about, we don't really have a clear identity in the Total Recall of what the technology is capable of. And that's kind of what allows us to talk about the movie this way, because they don't really set the limitation. If they had shown us a prototype, somebody in the office sat down, got their mind zapped with a vacation, and then, well, what do they do when one of these things goes right? Do you just leave the recall office and you knew you had a recall?
Yeah, I mean, the logistics of it, I almost think they would have to put you we put you up in a, low end, decent little condo for 2 weeks, and you just get to hang out and do whatever you want. It doesn't matter because you're not going to remember. Then you come into recall at the end of the 2 weeks. We zap the 2 weeks in our condo, and we give you the 2 weeks that you spent away, and then give you your nifty little souvenirs and your receipts, and you get to go home and tell people you went to Mars, and they don't know because you were gone for 2 weeks and you've got this really cool keychain. So obviously you must have went to Mars. I mean, you'd have to do something like that. Otherwise the dissonance that you're bringing up would be everywhere.
Or it would have to be the exact opposite. It would have to be like your virtual reality experience that I knew it was
fake.
Everybody knows it's fake, but you got to have something that feels like a real memory. I'm never going to climb Mount Everest, but if they planted this whole memory in there, and I know I really didn't climb Mount Everest, but it sure feels like it, and I can go into these rich memories that are better than any memory I have of anything I really did. That has some value to it. It really is exactly like virtual reality if you look at the technology in that way.
But if you know that they're fake memories, then kind of defeats the point of the total recall, doesn't it?
If it feels like you did it, I don't see how that wouldn't. If it feels like you did it, and in every way you have that crisp, clear memory, just like that memory of when you were at the beach with your family as a kid. And do you have any real fact that happened? Yeah, you did, because everybody else was there. But if you know you're going into it and that and it just feels exactly like a real memory, but you know it's not. I think that there would be value to that. To me, it does connect almost 1-to-1 to VR. Steve here again with a quick word from our sponsors.
Well, I mean, if you look at Quaid's story, right? Isn't it the whole reason it's so cool is the fact that when he's done his recall or what have you, it's a memory, and in his mind, it really happened. He was a secret agent and he saved Mars. If he knew that was kind of fake at the end of it, wouldn't you just kind of just do virtual reality or, I don't know, some super high intense video game? Like, I think the whole premise of the recall, it hinges on the fact that the person that does get the recall can't tell the difference.
I think you're right, but I also think that this is in the future a little ways. Maybe it is the equivalent of VR or going to a movie or whatever. It's like, yeah, this isn't the same as a real memory, but it's going to be close. And so I can't go on this plane trip flying through the Grand Canyon, but I can go to the IMAX theater in 3D and experience that. And I know it's not real, but I still remember the experience. I don't know. Obviously I think it really happened. So I'm going at it from a different angle entirely. But that's like you said, Steve. That's the beauty of good science fiction. And I never thought it's a good example here. I never thought of the theory that Chris put out that the recall experience starts, during the opening credits before we even open up on Mars. And, I don't know if I buy it yet or not. I haven't thought it through long enough, but it sure is an attractive, cool idea to consider, right away. And good sci-fi allows you to do that. It allows you to tinker around with it a bit. And Philip K. Dick has done that with so many of his films. Minority Report is another one of my favorites. The Adjustment Bureau. You want to talk about memory, the whole Paycheck movie, which isn't quite as close to the story, if I remember, as it was about as close as Total Recall is to the story, I think. But the concept is the same. And that's really what, at its core, a lot of good science fiction is about: the idea, and it can be translated into different events as long as the idea is still being explored. But we have people who have to sign NDAs, to do certain things. If we had the ability to wipe somebody's memory safely, then they'd do exactly that, right? They'd have you come and perform the work, and then they'd pay you, and you'd get your memory wiped instead of an NDA. You don't have to sign an NDA because you can't disclose because you don't remember,
Yeah.
And yeah, there's $2 million in your bank account. That's great. But, 6 months of your life are missing too. And you don't know what happened. And but it's a great premise. And, and of course in the film, there's no money. There's a bunch of weird things in the envelope that he left for himself as clues to himself. Kind of a no way out sort of thing, right? He's kind of trying to chase himself and figure himself out, the clues he left himself. And that could be an interesting story to follow. But you're a big Nicolas Cage fan, I know, Chris, and Next was based on one of Dick's stories as well. There's just just a treasure trove of great sci-fi ideas that have been, most of them made into pretty decent or at least serviceable movies. I can't think of any that were outright bad.
Yeah, which is, it's unfortunate for him because from my understanding, when he was writing, he struggled. Like nobody really, not a ton of people read his stories until like far later in his life. And he only ended up seeing, I believe it was Blade Runner was
Mm-hmm.
the only one that he saw when he was alive. And from my understanding, he hated
Blade
it.
Runner too.
He hated
Yeah.
it. So
He had the Stephen King, The Shining relationship, that movie for sure. He's an interesting guy, though. He's one of the first people to bring up the idea of simulation theory and to talk about it publicly and to posit it as a philosophical theory or a scientific question or both. And of course, Nick Bostrom picked it up and he expanded on it and certainly explored it some more. And then, I would argue popularized it. I mean, that's how I came to hear about it. It wasn't until after I knew about the idea from Nick Bostrom's work that I found out it had its origins with Philip K. Dick. But that's a guy thinking about something like that back in the 70s. I mean, what were computers like in the 70s? I mean, your smartphone is 10 times the computer anything they had in the 70s, 100 times more. I mean, even without its connectivity to the internet, it's more powerful.
Well, smartphones now, some smartphones are more powerful than computers that we had in the 90s. You remember back in the day, you used to have that giant modem just to run a home computer, right?
But even though these, computers were like 64K of RAM and their processing speed was, a bare fraction of what it is today. Even a potato that you're running on today is, light years ahead of what was available then. And yet he still had the vision to look at this and come up with this idea of simulation theory. And then honestly, the guts to talk about it in public, because I don't know about you, but when I told my wife about simulation theory, she looked at me a little funny for a couple hours, like, you don't actually believe that, do you? That's an interesting theory, but it's also crazy. So tell me now if I need to call the people with the white jackets that buckle in the back. I've got a phone here that has 100 times more processing power than the 70s, and I can call them on. So I think it was kind of gutsy of him to be sitting there talking at a seminar about this idea that today has adherents. You could almost call it certainly has philosophical adherents, if not religious ones.
Well, I mean, you can kind of see it with the Facebook thing, the metaverse, where people are, from my understanding of, I remember reading, like people were literally selling real estate in this metaverse. Like they were selling their houses and stuff in this metaverse. And that's kind of like what Zuckerberg is looking to do, is it not?
You guys remember World of Warcraft, the video game? People were selling real estate and weaponry and stuff like that in that back in early 2000s too. So this virtual ownership is been around for a while, and it's weird, because it's not physical, but I guess.
You mentioned World of Warcraft, and like I knew people that they pretty much ruined their life because of that video game. I know that sounds extreme, but literally just sitting there playing that video game for
marriages were broken over it.
14 hours.
Not just because of the 14 hours, but because of like romantic relationships taking place in the fantasy world with, non-player characters. Can you imagine your wife leaves you because you play World of Warcraft too much, but you think you might be able to get through the divorce because of the beautiful elf maiden that you're married to in World of Warcraft. And then you find out it's really Stanley, a 44-year-old plumber from Long Island. Talk about your world being getting crushed. You're going to want to, in that case, you're going to hope that this is an implant at recall and it's all a dream.
Well, I guess to kind of like wrap it up, and we'll say like 3 favorite things from the movie. And I myself personally, young Mustache Chris was seeing Sharon Stone. That was in the 80s style gym outfit. She's stunning.
Well, you stole my number. So, but my number 2 is when she shows up and in the gray pantsuit and fights with Melina, and then the whole part about that was your wife, and then when she tells him, "You won't shoot me, will you?" and he shoots her and says, "Consider it a divorce."
Oh, that's that was one of the best lines of all time. For me, I'm going in no particular order, but the incredible world building, like every single thing was detailed. And so you got such a taste for the world. The TVs that were playing news in the background, and was it a Marriott hotel on Mars? And like, just from the mundane to the high level with the domes, like Verhoeven created such a world without saying a single word. I thought that was just incredible. It was so 3-dimensional.
Show don't tell was definitely on display there.
Yeah.
I'd say, I guess for my next thing was, this might seem a little weird, but the Cohagen character, I just think he's brilliant. Like Ronnie Cox is amazing. And the way he plays that character is just, he's so over the top evil, but he does in such a way that you can't help but kind of laugh with him, because his portrayal is just so ridiculous. It's almost like straight off like a wrestling persona, like when he shuts the air off, and in Quaid's like, well, just turn the air back. There's no reason for him to not turn the air back on. He's like, nah, screw these guys. I'm not turning the air back on. Like, it is so over the top. I just love it.
Yeah, it's a good thing he didn't have a German accent, or it would have been a step too far. He's that bad. Actually, he's the reason for one of the other things I really liked. It's a small thing, but when he kicks over the aquarium or the little fish tank in his office, and there's a shot of the fish gasping for air, or on the floor there, a couple of them, and we know that's going to be the fate of these people in Venusville or whatever. And, it's not super subtle, but it's, it's visceral. It really evokes a sense of doom, and, it's a small thing, but, I really like that.
I liked it too, that there was very little speechifying. Like, everything was driven by dialogue. Nothing, it ties in with the scenery and the setting, that nothing really beat you over the head. It really was. It's an intellectual movie, and you can take it. That's what I think probably makes it one of the really masterpieces. That's probably, some people might think that's going a little far, calling it a masterpiece, but something is a masterpiece by my reckoning if you can enjoy it at many, many different levels. You can enjoy it as just somebody getting their arms ripped off and him saying, "Hang around," and you can enjoy it at that level. You can enjoy it as a sci-fi, and you can be enjoying it thinking about simulation theory and everything. And each scene adjusts that expectation. And to me, that's brilliant.
Yeah, my next one's probably a little less highbrow, but where they're having the shootout scene and he's going up the staircase, escalator, and he grabs the guy.
Oh, human shield.
Uses him as a human shield. They must have put like 60 squibs on this guy, man. There's nothing like a real squib going off, right? You can't replace it with CGI or anything. Like it's so visceral, it's so realistic looking, and he's just like 60, just fills him up with 60 shots, and then on top of it, he throws the body down the stairs. I love it. It's so great. It's one of the best parts of the whole film, is the fact that it's like super R rated, which is something that just Hollywood just doesn't really do anymore.
you'll notice that that guy that gets used as a human shield, he gets shot and killed before Quaid grabs him. So Quaid's not a bad guy grabbing an innocent person. He's grabbing a dead body, which is forgivable, right? I thought that was a nice little touch. I don't think I noticed that in previous views. And I guess the other thing I would say that stands out to me is the pacing. This movie it's at a breakneck speed from the first 3 minutes, and it punches the gas up to 80, then it drops back down to 50. We are never off the freeway cruising side streets or stopping at a rest stop for a burger. It is freeway all the way, baby. And that can sometimes not work in movies because you need those rest points. You need those caesures, that really make the action more impactful. But somehow it works. They slow down just enough and then speed it right back up. And it's a masterclass in thriller pacing or action pacing, I think.
The effects were amazing too, like Quato for that time period, and to do that with probably minimal to no CGI. I think that's probably what makes it stay so well, is that it wasn't over reliant on computer animation that would look really cheesy today, that it was all analog.
The only part that did look a little fakey was at the airport with the woman that he used as a disguise.
Yeah.
There were a couple of parts in that segment that looked fakey to me, but otherwise I was right there with you when he shows us Quato or the mutants, when Dean from Breaking Bad was showing up with that big slash in his face, that looked pretty cool. Yeah, I agree. Great. Those were great effects.
Yeah, earlier you said something to me about what makes a Paul Verhoeven film, and you were talking about the pacing. That's a Paul Verhoeven film. Film. Every time time you watch one of his films, it has that pacing where it's breakneck. Or even say something like Basic Instinct, it's tense from the get go right to the end. Maybe less so with Showgirls, and that's kind of a departure for him. But pretty much every other movie that he did over here in North America, it has that kinetic pace where it's just right from there's not a wasted minute on screen. Something is always happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is very true. If you were to sit down and try to trim this movie, good luck. Good luck finding a single second that you could clip away and not negatively impact it. I mean, it was very well edited and very tight. But at the core of it, it was the idea that made it so great, I think. And here we are, like Steve said, 35 years later, smacking each over the head with different theories. And we're all right because there's not enough to tell us if one or the other of us is right. It's all there for any of these theories, I think. And that's good art, and that's a good film.
I'd like to think that the day that Paul Verhoeven's about to croak, or before he dies, he's has a handwritten note about, was it real?
Was
or
real.
Not real? Or something. Because he refuses to say.
Well, of course.
You just think after all these years, he would hint in one direction or another, and it's just complete silence on his end, right? Which is brilliant.
He's held out longer than David Chase about the end of The Sopranos. He's held out longer than him.
Yeah, which is, because if he does say it will kind of ruin the movie too. Not ruin it, but it would.
I don't know if it ruins the movie, but then we have a different discussion, right? I mean,
yeah,
because you can make a discussion, you can make an argument that the artist's intent is a part of the equation, but that doesn't mean I can't take it differently. But it's certainly if he came and said exactly what Chris's theory was, if he laid it out that was the way he intended it, somebody's argument just got a lot stronger.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we have to agree with it because we can interpret the art the way we choose to interpret it. But oh boy, the intent of the artist, the writer's intent, I think carries a lot of weight.
So here's the deal. If we're all still alive and he croaks and he says what the ending is, and it turns out that I was right, we'll have to come back and do a third part about
where we just say we're not worthy and bow to you for like 20 minutes straight.
Was right. Chris's theory was right.
Chris's theory was right. If we have to do that, Chris, I think Steve and I are going to spend half of that time pointing out all the things you were ever wrong about, just for time.
The frog earlier was that the Society of Jesus, I said, and had a big brain
fart. There you go.
So,
whisper in your ear, "You're but only mortal."
You're only mortal.
I know.
Which you're going to find out. It's almost the 15th of March. So
I'm sure. I'm sure there's. I'm sure if I go looking for it, like a whole recall theory. I'm sure I can find people that think the same thing. I've thought that for a really long time, but regardless, I hope you guys enjoyed this show and had a few laughs and thought about the nature of reality and how we can ethically introduce technology into society.